So, ladies and gentlemen, it's a pleasure for me to share the room this afternoon with Thebe Ikalafeng, and it's an honor for us to be in conversation with you, Thebe.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So, good afternoon, everybody. As Enrico said, I'm going to talk to you today about a subject I'm passionate about, which is how you build great brands in the continent. But most importantly, how the continent itself is an inspiration for design, for branding, and for cultures around the world. I mean, we all know the continent. Enrico just gave a little bit of an introduction about myself. Born and raised in Kimberley, been in every country. Recognized 100 most reputable Africans, 100 most influential Africans, 100 most creative Africans, Hall of Fame from AdFocus, by Financial Mail, Hall of Fame, by PRISA. I love this magazine cover where I was a little bit younger, 15 years ago, I think, and it said, Thebe Ikalafeng leading a brand revolution. That's how I see myself. As I see myself, that I'm really leading a brand revolution. I think we're at that point. But you can't lead a revolution unless you know the continent. So I've been to every single country. I've done everything you can think of, eating monkeys, going to the highest point in the continent, the lowest point in South Africa, been to every single extreme, Namibia, England, Kenya. I've done every single part that you can think of. I think there's nothing I haven't done on the continent. So I'm bringing that perspective to you today. So, people always think, what is branding? Well, I love what Fortune magazine says branding. They said in the 21st century, branding will be the only way that we differentiate. So branding is very, very important in the continent. I mean, you all know Coca-Cola because you drink Coke all the time like I do. And they said that, more than half of the value of Coke lies in the brand Coca-Cola. So you can imagine that's why all decisions at Coke start in Atlanta and they end in Atlanta before they end in your Coca-Cola cup. So they take their brand quite seriously because they know that's where the value lies. So what is a brand then? I love what Martin Umar says. He says a brand is not a logo. He says a brand is a person's gut feeling about a product, a service, a company. It's not what you say it is, it's what the customers say it is. So branding is quite important. Your brand, your reputation is not what you say. You may craft it, and we're not sure if it's going to land properly. But the way it lands, that's why it is. What they say you are. At the end, to me, it's really about a promise made and a promise delivered. Nothing special. That's what branding is. So I know in class you learn a lot of good theory, but I want to simplify it for you that it's just a promise made and a promise delivered. And over the years, I've looked at what are the key things that drive great brands. And the 5 things that I'd like to single out is, first thing is that a great brand is very focused. You guys know Volvo. Volvo promises only one thing, safety. So there's clarity, there's focus. They're not promising you 20 million things. They say that all you're going to get from us is safety. The second thing about great brands is that they're very distinctive. You don't get confused. When you see any of these blocks, you know exactly what I'm talking about. You just see just a little part of the brand. Oh, that's McDonald's, that must be Coca-Cola, and that must be IBM, and that's obviously BMW. So, just based on just a small part of the brand, if your brand is clearly differentiated, you can tell what brand it is. You don't need too many cues to do it. Great brands also have an emotional connection. So what is the emotional connection? The guy said, I went to school in Milwaukee. That's where I did my undergrad and my MBA before I did law much later. And I learned, and Harley Davidson is from Milwaukee. And they were asking the guys at Harley Davidson, what is it that people love so much about your brand? They say, but it can't be the bike because it's so big and bulky and slow. They say, but we don't sell bikes. What we sell is the ability of a 43-year-old accountant to dress in black leather, ride through small towns and have people be very afraid. So you can see, they say they're selling a feeling. It's a feeling they sell. The fourth thing about great brands is that they change over time. I mean, what we used to be and where we are now, right? Things change over time. It's an evolution. So should we, and so do brands. So our continent has changed quite a bit, right? We are now no longer, they say by 2050, 62% will be urbanized. We'll be making babies like crazy. By 2050, it'll be 2 billion. I think we'll comprise, 40% of the world's population. Will be 60% of the 40% of the world population. And I think if you look at from where we are now, more than 60% of the population is under the age of 25. We're a very young continent, but we're making money. GDP, you can see. And we are now, looking at what we're doing with the AFCFTA, Africa Continental Free Trade Area. You can see we're now opening up the border. So there's a lot of change. Our brand is changing. That's why people now speak about us. They say Africa is rising. So, because there used to be a time when they say we're a hopeless continent, but we're no longer. Now that it's not the strongest of the species that survives, but the one that's most responsive to change. So one of the great things about golden brain brands is you have to be responsive to change. You have to keep looking at where changes are, and you have to go there. But what I love mostly about brands, and the fifth thing, is that great brands build their country. When you see a brand like MTN during the World Cup or any other time across 20 plus countries, people say that must be an African brand. If you look at what SAB Miller said, they say it is the SA in SAB that makes us who we are. I've always loved this because they recognize that the brand carries the country with it wherever it goes. And maybe in the instance like MTN, where they don't have the name South Africa, or in the case of SAB, where they have the name SA, that they carry the brand, the character of the brand. That's why someone else says brands of a country more often than not become a vector of the image of the country. So people look at your brand and they say, oh my goodness, if MTN is from South Africa must be a great country. So if it's a great brand that travels the world, or SAB, because now we sold in SAB to InBev in Belgium, so it's no longer Brazil. It's no longer a South African business, but it's a South African brand. So it takes the image of South Africa as a country that can create great brands, like an MTN, like an SAB. So that's why we don't take. Lightly to brands that says we are hopeless, because we are no longer hopeless. We're a continent that is changing, a continent that is changing beyond how others have created a story about us. All the stories about Africa have been written by anybody else, by us. The Out of Africa, what Robert Redford and Meryl Streep. We didn't write that story. That's why they can say we are hopeless. They look about our continent, they say, oh my goodness, it's a continent of animals everywhere. They're fighting everywhere. They're so sophisticated. But and they look at what happens in Zimbabwe or any other country, and they say it's a whole continent. But we know we can say something about their countries as well. They may think that ours are just about war and poverty. We know what we think about theirs, right? We think about America, freedom and Jesus. Think about South America, drugs and super models, right? Beautiful people, or Russian male brides. So it's just a perception. But some shifts have to be made. We need to make some shifts if we want people to think differently about the continent. We need to make shifts if we want to build great African brands. And one of the biggest shifts that we need to make in building African brands is pride and confidence. We need to bring back the pride in Africa, the pride in who we are as Africans, and be confident of who we are. So I love this. The survey was done many years ago. I hope it's still the same. It hasn't been done in a while, but I love what he said then. He says, I'm proud to be African. I have confidence in my country. So it's a beautiful slide. I hope we're still here. If you're not here, I want us to get there quickly, right? So how do we reimagine Africa? So the first thing I said, accept who we are. I used to love this, the G7 or G20, I don't know how many, the 2468, 10, I think it's the G20. Obasanjo and Mbeki were still in the presidency, and Kofi Annan was still alive. What do you love about this picture? Obasanjo accepted who he is. He says, I'm a Nigerian, addressing Agbada. That's how they must see me. So part of the confidence and pride is to be seen to who you are and to go to your continent. So accepted, we are Xhosas, we are Tsongas, we're Pedis, we're Zulus, we're Vendas, we're Tsonga, we're Africans, we're English. That's who we are. All the 11 languages in the continent and the 11 cultures. Okay, this year I think we've got the 12th one added, which is the sign language. Accept our names as well. When Tsepo launched this gene, they used to say to him, how could you call a gene Tsepo? Well, he says, I grew up, they say, we wouldn't buy a gene from a guy called Tsepo in Tsakane. Of course you should, because you can relate to the Tsepo name better than you can relate to Giorgio and Armani and Dolce and Gabbana. We've never met those people, but Tsepo we can relate to, the way we can relate to a Dangote, we can relate to a Batu because they speak our language and it's our style. So part of our moving the African brands forward and building great marketing in Africa is to accept who we are. I love what my namesake from my country, from my neighborhood, Thebe Magugu, how he took all the 9 cultures and represented them in this new range that he just launched this past 2023 winter. Beautiful, African, tells our story, celebrates who we are, but it's global. Remember, these brands are worn by everybody else. So the same way that we are proud to wear the Dolces and the Gabbanas and the Louis Vuittons and all those other people, we should also take to the world who we are. Because you see, they bring to us who we are. We need to take to them who we are. From the food, from clothing, from design, from everywhere else. Even the names recognize who we are, accept who we are. We accepted with a country that perhaps was in Durban was inspired by Mahatma Gandhi, the biggest Indian community outside of India. So it's accepting who we are, our cultures, our identity. I love what Tupac Shakur says. He says, but to changing the face can change nothing, but we need to face the change. And that changes everything. So accepting who we are is by facing the change and say, this is who we are, this is where we're going, and that's how we need to see ourselves. Part of how we're going to build great brands in the continent as well is by changing our perspective, right? So stop looking at the continent as a continent as portrayed by Hollywood of war, the Hotel Rwandas, and all those fights for diamonds. Rather look at it as the continent that's produced A to B's. At the base which time is coming out of the beauty, celebrate the beauty. Because so the story that will be told about us is a story about the fight for diamonds, the fight for minerals, the fight for all those. We can change our perception. We can change the world perception by retelling that narrative. Retelling the narrative of us always fighting to us always running. So we can either run away from the fight or run away from the competition. So it's how we see ourselves and tell a story. Just don't look at us as primitive. Look at us as Grammy Award music, using our own songs, our own style. See, Ladysmith Black Mambazo, when Paul Simon came to them, they didn't say, let us globalize the message. They said, let's take us who we are as we are, homeland. Let's take it, our homeland, to your homeland. You look at the bags, and many of us are now look down on these bags. Don't look down on them. These bags, Louis Vuitton took that same bag and put it on the ram. And you are the ones who came running around and said, oh, I can proudly carry my gun. I must go to the airport without people pitying me. You always had it. You always had it. Change your perception, change your perspective about what comes from the continent. But of course, if we're going to build a great continent, we need to stop blaming CNN, BBC, and Al Jazeera. We need to stop begging others for their money. We need to stop borrowing. We just need to create great brands. So what do we know about the brands in the continent? So for the last 13 years, I've been conducting this survey of the most admired brands in the continent. So this is the latest study I'm sharing with you. 86% of the brands that Africans admire are non-African. So you see the problem we're facing. We're not supporting and championing our own brands. 86, only 14% of what we love comes from us. It's a rejection of who we are. Most of them come from Europe, 37%, America, 32%, Asia, 17%, and us, only 14%. And what brands are those? In the continent, they come from Nigeria, South Africa, and Ethiopia. So that's where all the brands come from. We've got 54 countries. We should be producing a lot more brands than that, not just coming from a few. And what are those brands? In Africa, the number 1 brand, MTN, number 2, Dangote, number 3, Trekking from Zambia, Dangote from Nigeria. In Asia, Samsung, dominant, Toyota, Japan, Techno, China. The brands that we love from Europe, Adidas, Gucci. And Gucci is only in Sandton or in Durban, but you can see in Cape Town, but you can see there, dominates, because where can you find it? At all the flea markets. It's not the real Gucci, but hey, it's a Gucci. And Zara, number 3. In North America, Nike, Coke, and Apple. We know those brands very well. So how can we do this differently? This is how I think we need to do it differently, based on what examples exist. We need to inspire a new way of building brands in a continent. you look at a brand like Coca-Cola, for example. When Coke wanted to launch in Ghana, what did they do? When Vodafone wanted to launch, Coke wants to launch everywhere else, they adapt the language, they adapt everything else. You can't just come and just put in badges as they've done here. I think right now you say you've done the job. That's not good enough. But what's good enough is when you take your culture, like the Ghanaians took the Ashanti chair and used that to inspire the head of presidency. Or us here in South Africa for the World Cup, we took the calabash and we used that to inspire our stadium. Sepp Blatter looked at us and says, oh my goodness, this is a global brand. He says it's as good as Wembley, but it speaks to Africa beautifully. Or Investec, we started using the zebra. And when they asked the guy from Investec, he says, no, I want people anywhere in the world, when they see our brand, they must say this brand here has got roots from somewhere. It's got that African can-do spirit. I took these pictures, I think I took this in Heathrow, some stage when I was traveling. Or, some of the beliefs that we have, like Tokoloshis. We laugh at them because some of us grew up lifting the beds with bricks for this. But what we need to do is say, hey, maybe we should inspire to create different types of beds, because there's a story in there, right? So we look at what is our tradition from the Ndebeles, for example. Take that into the world in the way that resonates. Or Vlesco, for example, or Samsung. They're using solar-based, which is ample in the continent to power their TVs, their computers, and the machines. Or, how we look. Mustn't be afraid of it. Look at everybody else wants to look like us. That's why Levi's took those jeans and opened up those jeans and called them the Eva. I think they called many other names afterwards, because they thought local and they acted global. So look at the insights from local before you go out into the world. And the other thing, of course, that's important is intellectual property. So part of intellectual property is understanding what you own. You look at Rooibos from South Africa. You look at Ethiopian coffee, which fought with Starbucks, or Rooibos, which fought with the French, or champagne, where South Africa was trying to fight with the France, and the France says, but champagne comes from France, so you can't own champagne. So that's why we went to MCC. Those of us who drink in here, except me, I don't drink. Know what I'm talking about, right? MCC. And the Ethiopian, they went to Starbucks and said, Starbucks coffee comes from here. This coffee, particularly those names, are our names. And that's how they that's how they won the battle against Starbucks. Or you look at some small solutions, because the thing that makes African brands great is that the brands must change lives. You look at a brand like M-Pesa, which is mobile money transfer. That brand has changed Kenya. Over 70% of Kenya's economy runs through M-Pesa. Because why? You are now able to take money from urban part of Kenya to send it to a rural part of Kenya using just a small phone and an SSD card, an SSD phone, USSD, sorry. So it's really about understanding how a brand can change, transform. A survey was done by TIPS or by World Bank, and they found out that M-Pesa has transformed Kenya to such an extent that it moved from 10% access to financial services in 2006 to 70% in 2010. In 4 years, it's changed the world. That's what African brands do. Because the thing to remember about what we do when we're building great brands is we promise and we deliver. That's what we do. And part of the big promise is a promise to change the continent, to accept who we are, to accept how we are, to accept our cultures, our languages, our way of doing things, our shortcomings. The thing to remember is that our continent, people talk about it all the time. It's not a very poor continent. It's just poorly managed. So when it comes to a leadership perspective, what we need to do, we need to just change how we think about the continent. Because if you do this, we'll be able to build a great brand. So I hope these quick insights have been excellent inspiration for you to build a brand in the continent, to build brands in the continent, and to think about marketing in the continent. Just take this one thing with you. As Fela Kuti once said, you must identify with Africa. Then you'll have an identity. Our identity is our biggest currency. It's our biggest distinguishing fact, because we cannot beat the Italians at being Italian. We cannot beat English at being English, the American at being Americans, but we can beat them at being African, because that's our currency. Thank you.